to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Meadle, joined today by Chris Bugay. Hey, Chris.
Hey, what's going on, Rachel?
Not much. What do you got for me this week?
Well, I got a little recap of what you and I did together. So at the beginning of this episode, we heard people lead in with the little I don't know, community involvement, I guess is the best way to put it, is that you and I had an incredible opportunity to go to Montana and present together in person in Missoula, Montana, to a wonderful group of people. And of course, we asked them to say, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And that's what you heard at the beginning of this episode. So what are some takeaways or thoughts you had from Montana?
First of all, I love Montana. It's the second time I've been there. I had never been to Missoula, and we had such an amazingly warm welcome, Chris. I feel like such a well-organized event, and the people were amazing. I feel like we had a really great day full of awesome conversations and lots of really great insights. Really dynamic group. We had a virtual audience too, which we were able to chat with and talk to. I feel like the production value was super high. Like they had like all these different camera angles, and we were mic'd up, and it was just like felt like I was giving a TED Talk.
It was great. The layout of the room was sort of stadium style, like lecture hall, because it was at a university. And so you and I were sort of at the front of the room. And if anyone has seen us present before, they know that I like to run around the room and be the person with the mic, and you stand sort of at the front and sort of direct the action, and that's a great way we team things up. But because of the style of this room, what they actually had to accommodate that sort of experience was multiple people with microphones running around, and when someone would raise their hand, that someone else would run to the back of the room, and we had multiple people doing this. And then, like you said, we had a virtual experience going on. So like over my left shoulder throughout the entire presentation, there was the Zoom room, and we had somebody being the human moderator for the Zoom room, like answering questions and clarifying things, and it was just a really fun, interactive, dynamic experience. The people in the room were engaged and asking questions and participating. The people in the virtual space were engaged and participating, and our hosts were amazing. So if you ever get a chance to go to the MontCom conference up in, well, I don't know if that it's always in Missoula. It was definitely in Missoula this time. Definitely go. Definitely learn more about it. And we would always love to go back because we had such a great time.
Yeah, we love Montana. That's the takeaway. We love Montana.
I had never been to Montana before. I had actually presented there virtually. I was supposed to go there in person, and then something happened March 2020. Oh, yeah, the pandemic hit. And so that turned from an in-person experience to a virtual one. I had been to Idaho. Missoula is on the western side of Montana, which borders Idaho, and I've been to Idaho a couple of times, but so I've been familiar with that area geographically, but not actually in that state, in that city, and then you and I got to pal around for a bit, a little bit like before the presentation and a little bit after the presentation. We got to hang out and see a little bit of Missoula, go out to dinner, go along the river. It was fun to hang out with you. It's fun to hang out in Missoula and explore a new city together.
Chris, you forgot one really amazing thing that is a huge takeaway for me, the ice cream cones that we had. We had the most amazingly delicious ice cream cones. We had a little coupon code from MontCom, and they gave us a free ice cream cone, and we definitely took advantage.
Yeah, luckily where we were staying was like in just a hop, skip, and a jump over to the Big Dipper ice cream. Not that we were sponsored by Big Dipper, but
we would love to be. If Big Dipper is listening, please sponsor this podcast.
If you're ever in Missoula and you get a chance to go to Big Dipper ice cream, please do that. That was a great experience, super fun. All right, so with that said, Rachel, I think there's some other stuff that we need to dig in here to today, and that is we might not be able to get to all of this today before we get into our interview, but someone wrote me and asked a question. This person actually wrote me on LinkedIn and had some questions, which I wrote back, but I also said, you know what, I'm going to bring this up to Rachel on the podcast because it's good stuff to reflect on, and let's get into and talk about it. So this person writes, "Hi, I'm Caleb, and I'm a speech language therapist from Singapore, currently working in a school in Singapore which serves students with moderate to severe autism. And this person is a big fan of the podcast and has said that they've learned so much listening to the banter segments and to the interviews that we've done over the years. This person goes on to say, manpower is always an issue and it's difficult to support and cover so many students with complex communication needs in the school. And that's why I loved the idea of the specific language system first approach, where we can provide Tier 1 AAC support to most students. Even though I've just joined this school, I've had the opportunity to implement your approach, and we've been seeing and hearing of its benefits. Teachers report that many students, many of whom only used PECs in the past, have been able to transition with ease to a pointing system with the communication boards. Awesome and not surprising. So fantastic. Students have been understanding, learning, and using core words that are modeled. Excellent. Teachers prepare fun activities to teach the core word of the week, right? Again, awesome stuff, right, Rachel?
Yeah, this is great.
Okay. Goes on to say, teachers' confidence in using the communication board has dramatically increased, and they've been using it more during the day, not just at snack time, ha ha ha, right? Which, that's so great because this person's recognizing that sometimes communication lives and dies around snack, right? And we whip out the AAC device during snack time, invite students to make requests, and then put that thing away, right? When I say this is maybe 10, 15 years ago, that's a lot of how AAC was implemented. So I'd like to think that has changed tremendously over the years. He goes on to say, I do have 3 questions, and I wonder if I could get some clarity. So here's question number 1, Rachel. Regarding a communication prompting hierarchy, if a student is new to the communication board or device, and we jump right to the last step and model without expectation, how much time do we spend at that level? Is there a criteria or level to achieve before we can start progressively moving down the prompting hierarchy? Like starting with wait time and then going to some sort of natural verbal cue and then some sort of visual cue or gesture, then a verbal prompt, and then modeling on the device. And that's how he characterizes it. So that's the first question. So let's start there because there's more questions that he has, but let's just answer that, right? So what are your thoughts on the prompting hierarchy and the way he's characterizing here as sort of, he's sort of asking, do you need to wait to move on along the prompting hierarchy?
I think this is a really great question, and I think it comes up a lot. There's a lot of confusion around modeling because we see it on a prompting hierarchy and we see it pretty far down and we're like, oh no, I thought I'm not supposed to be down there in the red zone. And so let's clarify this. The prompting hierarchy, the least to most prompting hierarchy, when I say prompting hierarchy, that's what I mean. The least to most prompting hierarchy is something that you implement when you actually have already taught a word or a concept. So you wouldn't want to implement a least to most prompting hierarchy without having giving aided language input. So I think part of the distinction is we always teach and model without expectation first, but when we feel like we've done a lot of teaching, so this, person has a core word of the week that a lot of the teachers have been implementing. So that would look like modeling that core word of the week, every day, all day, really giving that language immersion. And then maybe towards the end of the week, trying to see if you could fade, some of the prompting and the scaffolded support that you're giving a student to see if we can get spontaneous or more independent communication around that word. So, I think that there's modeling without expectation, which is what we know kids need in order to learn language. But if we're just constantly modeling and we're never giving kids space to actually formulate and communicate independently, then they'll just kind of wait for us to model and they'll be, imitating our models, but they're not actually generalizing to, I'm going to use this word completely on my own. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing, the way this person wrote this made me think that they were thinking the prompting hierarchy was per kid or per learner as opposed to per word or, we're adopting the phrase now. I'm moving away from we're using words and using core themes, right? So the idea that it's not just a word, but a word plus the associated morphemes. So go is a word, but going is a word, but went is a word, and goes is a word. Let's not do word of the week. Let's do core theme of the week so we get more hits in. Okay, but that's side nugget, right? I think the way this person was sort of writing this is thinking that the prompting hierarchy was related to a student. Like we would do modeling on the device, or we would be giving a student verbal prompts for all the words we were doing. We'd be at that level on the prompting hierarchy. And what I'm thinking is that it's not related to a individual student, it's related to an individual word, meaning an individual, or again, Corfine. When you're going through the prompting hierarchy, you're actually doing that each time you're interacting with a student, right? So each time I'm with a student, so they're sitting next to me, and we're playing with crayons, let's say, right? There's crayons, and we're coloring. I might say something on my device, just like modeling next to the kid. I might say something, and then I'm just providing wait time. I'm not saying anything. And that's the first step on the hierarchy. And if they don't use their device or say anything or comment or react in any way, then I might sort of be like gesture. Like people can't see me, but I'm just sort of like nodding towards the device, or like pushing my hands in a way like, and making a little face like, hey, you might want to do this, looking at the device and pointing to the device. And then if that student in that moment doesn't do that, then I might point to a particular word or give a verbal prompt and be like, here, your turn, you do it, something like that, like along those lines. And I would be moving through this hierarchy in each instance for each interaction with a kid, so that a kid wouldn't necessarily be at a level of the prompting hierarchy. There might be some words, some things a kid might want to say, and all they needed was the wait time. And there's others where they have never heard that word before. They needed to see me use it a bunch of times before they would use it. So that we might expect they might need a different level of prompting because it's the first time they're ever experiencing this word, right? So I think the prompting hierarchy varies based on the word or Corfine. And I'll use those interchangeably for right now, as to not to confuse people. But not necessarily a kid. Well, I don't think a kid is going to be at a prompting hierarchy just in general. Like it's going to be vary per word. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely word specific. I also think it's very dependent on the level of motivation for whatever activity you're doing or whatever, response you're hoping to get. If you are doing an activity that kids aren't that excited about, you could pause and wait all day long and they're likely not going to do much. Versus if you find something super exciting that like they're bouncing out of their seat because they're so excited, especially if you've embedded a specific word into a familiar routine, and you've done a lot of repetitive practice modeling that word, you're more likely to see more independent communication. You're going to be higher up on that prompting hierarchy as far as giving less prompts and getting closer to independent communication.
He later goes on to say, because I wrote that back to him, so I'm skipping around our correspondence. He did go on to say, this clarification regarding least and most prompting is really appreciated. This makes a lot more sense to me now. He says it's kind of a culture shock for many teachers or parents who are used to PECs or other sort of systems like that that relies heavily on physical or hand-over-the-hand prompts to embrace this notion of inspire, don't require, right? And that you might just be modeling without immediate expectation for a student to do anything. He says physical prompts are part of the protocol that has been adopted in the past, and we've observed how many students become incredibly reliant and dependent on physical prompts and aren't able to achieve independence and spontaneity in communication. Exactly. I mean, we know that you know those kids. I know those kids. People listening to this podcast likely know those kids who are 100% prompt dependent. They'll have their tool. They'll look at you. They'll hover their finger over a word and be like waiting for you to give them permission to say a word that has already been prescribed by somebody else, rather than coming from within them themselves. He goes on to say, I recently had the opportunity to conduct an AAC training for 120 teachers in our school, and I introduced this phrase from one Rachel Nadel saying, inspire, don't require, to remind the teachers that communication is not compliance, but it's connection over anything, right? And he says, I go on to remind them that we can't force or demand communication, but instead show the students what they can say when they're ready or if they want to. And it's like, yes, Caleb, yes.
I love that. I love that Inspire Don't Require has made it to Singapore, Chris. I'm like, it's so exciting. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just like really hard sometimes to start shifting your mindset, especially because a lot of these teachers, that's what they've been taught to do for communication, and it's like starting to think through a different lens can be sometimes challenging, but we know that we have to find things that are really exciting for kids to communicate about if we can expect them to learn how to communicate and to do so independently and autonomously. It's just like so many kids are so prompt dependent. Like when we were in Montana, Chris, I remember specifically asking the question, raise your hand if you know an individual who's completely dependent on prompting from an adult in order to communicate. Like it was just like everyone like raised their hand, and it's just like, this is the problem. So, to kind of tie a bow in it, the least to most prompting hierarchy is a way to get students communicating more independently. We scaffold the support for them to get them inching closer and closer to independent communication.
Well, he goes on. There's other questions, but I don't think we're going to have time for them today. I think we should maybe wrap this up because we have an interview to get to, and that interview is with part 2 of Sean Sweeney. Now, in part 1, we talked a lot about Jeopardy. In part 2, what we're going to talk about is Sean has developed a framework over the years called Fives, which he uses to sort of consider materials that he might use with individuals. And he kind of runs things through this paces of the Fives protocol or the Fives framework to help determine whether this is a good material or not to use with students. So without further ado, let's listen to part 2 of our interview with Sean Sweeney.
Hi everybody, this is Chris, the Vice President of Impact Voices. I have exciting news. Registration is open for Impact Voices Live Hangout in celebration. It is time to register for this exciting new conference. This is the only conference bringing the business and AAC community together to network. We are going to impact, empower, and connect everybody. Go to impactvoices.org/registration to register. For the best room rate, reserve your hotel room before September 9th. We are looking forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about Jeopardy and Jeopardy questions that in relation to AAC, the way I'm making a connection there is this, how we often talk about motor planning, how we have to keep the buttons in the same spot, don't move them around, right? And some people will say, well, then why do you need pictures? Like if you learn where the words are, then you don't eventually need pictures. And we know there are certain AAC users that don't need the pictures anymore. Like in the same way that we have on our QWERTY keyboards typing letters, but eventually they might wear off and you still know where they are, they don't necessarily need all the symbols. And people say, then why have the symbols at all? And the way it was taught to me was the difference between your recognition network and your recall. And so when you're doing Jeopardy, you think you're drawing on recall a lot, like I'm kind of recalling information. But because of the way the words are, like you said, the clues are sometimes worded, it might, or you see something, like if I saw the words blackbird in the dead of night, like chances are the Beatles are going to jump out and I'm going to want to say the Beatles, right? Because who else is going to put those words together, right? You recognize, so there's a recognition there, not like an actual, truly a recall that information. Is that fair? Or what do you think about that when it comes to like looking at Jeopardy questions?
Yeah, I mean, well, recognition too is often sometimes when you're presented with like, sometimes I'll see stuff on Jeopardy of like, if I was given choices, I would know, which one, that is. But it's exactly like you said that, sometimes the syntax gets in the way of even activating any of that. People were generally more than generally awesome and kind and just reached out to me and was so supportive. But there was one clue that said something like this turning back time singer, and then went on to mention some song by Cher that I've never heard of. Okay. And it was a triple stumper. We all stood there and we were beep, beep, beep. And so I got so much crap after that because, being a gay who could not answer a question about Cher, there was a certain element of shame. But it, yeah, it can be tough. How deep you've learned something, how the surface of where a fact lies in your brain, I think really connects to it being a recognition versus recall thing too.
I think about this
That
often with
your question.
I think about this often with the students that I work with. I have kids who have verbal speech, but it's really hard for them to retrieve. And, the moment you give them context or choices or, something visual, it's like, oh, they've got it, but it's so challenging when you don't have anything and you just have to pull from the resources of your brain, depending how much exposure you have, depend on the processing that you have and other things kind of at play. And so I feel like there's kind of a parallel there too, as you had mentioned, if there was multiple choice, I could totally have answered that. It's kind of a support strategy that we give to our students. And also one of the reasons AAC can be so beneficial when we're thinking about students who have extreme challenges with word retrieval. Automatically, they have context to scan their potential options of things they could say or how they could formulate something. And it just slows down the process a lot, which is one of the major benefits for students who might have verbal speech that's easy to understand, but they have significant formulating challenges and word retrieval challenges.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, in terms of vocabulary, it's so fascinating that, for Jeopardy, you basically have to have a vocabulary of everything that's in the world. It's self-fringe, I guess, right? So, people would need extensive, array of boards to be able to do that.
Well, it's something we always say when we are presenting, when Rachel and I present, we talk about what does the word robust language system, what's a robust AAC system? And we say, well, okay, it's got thousands of words. It's got the morphological endings. It's got the ability to have quick fire phrases. And sorry, I was leading you up to Rachel. And
it has a keyboard because we can't possibly program every single word there ever was or will be into an AAC system. So we need a keyboard. And then of course we need to teach kids literacy skills.
Absolutely. That would definitely widen the field of people who could participate for sure.
So that kind of leads me to the next thought I had about Jeopardy, like thinking, how there's like, you said there's Professor's Week coming up or whatever. I don't know if it's a week. It used to be a week, right? Is it like that? Or there's a period of time where it's professors, right? Or there's a period of time where it's like, I remember back in the day, it was Teen Week, and there was teen, right? So I was wondering about AAC users, right? Like you said, you said it so eloquently about like being privileged to be there, and that there's certain people would not necessarily be able to participate in this experience based on lots of factors. Well, one of the factors might be that you're an AAC user who would maybe know all of the answers, but not be able to buzz in as fast or get the answer out as fast, and it just got me thinking about, what would the accommodations be like if you wanted an AAC user to participate, make it more of an inclusive experience, or if you had just AAC Users Week and it was all AAC users that were playing together, still, how would you have to change some of the dynamics in Jeopardy to like, okay, because it's going to take some time maybe to formulate, and we just wait for them to formulate the answer, but is it, I don't know. It just got me thinking about it. It's just a fun thing to think about. I thought I don't have answers.
They definitely have to adjust the timing. Like you need more than 5 seconds. You need more than 30 seconds to get your, it's 5 seconds per any answer. 30 seconds for your final Jeopardy. There's quite a lot of visual stuff that people don't know about Jeopardy too, that when you are standing there at that podium, you are looking across the entire stage, and that's how you're reading that clue. It does not appear down in front of you. That's why you never see contestants looking down, and reading. They want them to be looking that way, and it's not that big. I actually really went through a debate, like glasses versus no glasses. I went and tried to get contacts, and apparently I have tiny eyes, and it was this torturous process. Left without contacts, I'm like, forget it. All right, so during rehearsal I wore the glasses, and then I didn't. But yeah, you have to be able to see. So for I think a lot of contestants maybe could benefit from something that's larger, in terms of print, and even the visual clues, maybe just more visual clues, because they don't give you that many, and they are again across the stage on a not that big TV. So some of the times I was going was due to this TV that was way across the stage. So I think around timing and visual and just being in a cohort that you could compete with, of course, like you said, I think that would be really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about those visuals as well, and like there's no alt text on those visuals, right? So there's no description of what the images are when a picture comes up. So yeah, that would certainly be something that would have to be added, even if you just had someone who had a visual impairment, right? Not using AAC, not taking AAC out of it. I mean, okay.
There was a fairly significantly achieving champ some years ago, I recall, who was blind, but I have no idea what kinds of accommodations they might have given him in terms of, maybe an earpiece that was describing the picture, or maybe a monitor with enlarged text or something. So it might have been a behind the scenes thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Do you have any other questions, Rachel, about Jeopardy? Because I was about to shift the conversation to another topic, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Here's what the last thing I wanted to ask you, Sean, or we wanted to talk to you about. And that was you came up with an acronym that you used when you talk about apps called FIVES. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So it was about maybe a year into when I was blogging, I started to think about how could I make what I'm doing here a little bit more portable for people, meaning that, they're not just dependent on people saying, oh, use this thing or use this thing, how to self-evaluate, the world of available resources that are out there, which then exploded even more because of apps and people's interest in apps and having the portability and the reduced learning curve of the iPad. And I've always been an acronym guy. I'm teaching my students acronyms all the time, and they're like, oh, another acronym, Sean. So I went in that direction. So FIVES is really criteria that we can use to look at any resource that maybe wasn't designed for therapeutic purposes, and sort of tease it apart. How would we, let's say an administrator walked in the room, and why were you using that thing? Be able to explain, not to be anti-administrator. I'm sure you're very supportive as the administrator, Chris. How to be able to explain or justify some of the things that we are using. So it stands for fairly priced. That's the F. Originally it stood for free, and then I realized with apps that wasn't sending the best message, because there was a lot of great resources that cost a couple of bucks, but fairly priced. Interactive. So students love interactivity, and interactivity promotes like choice, causality, sequence, decision making. Sometimes a narrative unfolds through interactivity, or you can create a narrative, and stuff like highly interactive apps like Book Creator, visual, because all of our students, could benefit from visual supports and technology, often can make abstract concepts more visual. E for educationally relevant. There's so many resources we can use that make the curriculum all of the, preceding criteria, make them more visual, make them more interactive, and, help students get engaged with curriculum topics in science and social studies, for example, which has always been, those have always been places I've loved to pull from. And then the S is kind of more of the activity analysis of thinking about this activity seems to involve some sequencing, or there's some great vocabulary here. The S standing for either speechy or specific, if you hate the word speechy. Some people do, including me. So I don't know why I went in that direction, but how specific is this? I did some work with some folks in Waldo County, Maine, who developed a telepractice training center, and Amy Reed, who works with them and often presents at ASHA, talks about a material having a clinical clarity, just some clear purpose of it, and the S is around that. It's something students could work together on, and therefore be practicing pragmatic skills. Or is there some way that it records, and that they could therefore do be practicing speech production? So there's so much of that S when you kind of tease out what an activity was designed for and what it might be useful for. I recently wrote about something, I like to take examples that seem very out of left field. And the new Jurassic World movie that's coming out at some point, they put out a website that's this fictionalized dino tracker, because the concept of the movie is the dinosaurs are now among us. That's the new normal, is that there's dinosaurs everywhere. All right. And on the dino tracker, you can navigate through a map, like a Google Earth map, a Google Earth-like map, and go to different locations, and they'll show you like a video of the sighting of this dinosaur in Palo Alto or something like that. And it's just great for, geographic awareness, and a lot of our students could really benefit from having, the continents reviewed in an engaging manner, where are the countries, because that's kind of the way we sort out the stories about the world, is if you know more about, if you hear a story and you can kind of pin it on a map in your brain, that can be helpful. So,
I don't know, Sean. I think it'd be much better if you just had a bunch of flashcards with dinosaurs, and you just tell me this, name this, name this,
name this one.
Yeah, something like that is so, like you said, so fun, so engaging, and like you said, what you're taking there is something that's other people are just playing with in the world, but you're turning it into, this is how we're going to use it for the educationally relevant, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also like a lot of language on the site, so it depends on what level you wanted to use it. What would you want to emphasize? Because it had like do's and don'ts if you see a compysaur, and so you could kind of translate that any way you want in terms of just working on reading comprehension. That's expository text. So there's languages everywhere, so we can use that to our advantage for sure.
Yeah. I'm literally, is it JurassicWorld.com?
No, it's on speechtechie.com. I don't know the exact location, but the link is there, and it's called Dino Tracker. But I think if you looked up the Jurassic World Dino Tracker, you would find that. So always just examples like that.
I have a kid who's obsessed with dinosaurs, and I will be using this today with him. So thank you for giving me my therapy plan for this kid. I'm going to see you later.
Well, we've been fans of the Fives framework. Is that what you call it? I think it's a framework to be thinking about any resource that you come across and sort of adopting that. And I can even see taking it and kind of putting up a poster in your office or in your room so that when you come across resources, you can run it through this sort of checklist to know, yes, this is, I could use this, or no, not really, and then, like you said, having some evidence to back up why you do need to, if you do need to justify a purchase or something to somebody. Well, look, I ran it through this protocol, and here's my little write-up of why I think I need this tool. that gives someone, it makes it visual for an administrator to say, oh, okay, so they didn't just want this, they didn't just get sold on it, they put some time and thought behind it and how they're going to use it. So I really love that as a protocol beyond just therapy. I mean, it could be used in the ed tech world for any educator looking at any sort of parents looking at, do I drop some money on this app, or should I, skip this one? Let me run it through the fives and see how it plans out.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been nice that it's been something that's been sticky with people, because it was something I kind of put together a bit impulsively. And, I recently saw Eric Raj, who does Dr. Eric Raj now, who does a lot of presenting. He showed me his slide, and he's putting it into a presentation, and I'm like, wow, it lives. So that's great that it's still out there and people find useful. I'm often just doing that kind of sifting in my mind. I was on Larry Ferlazzo's blog, which is about ESL and ELL learning. He recommended a Eurovision video generator. See, I'm a Eurovision person. I followed the Eurovision Song Contest, which is that crazy contest they have, and it was last weekend, about all the countries put forth a video, and it's usually a very elaborate and or goofy song that ends up. So you can make different choices of who the band is going to be, and then you can pick what the topic of their song, and that included things like grandma. I don't know, and then there could be so much you could do, because it kind of leaves some blanks to what the song ended up with. So what are some of the song lyrics that you could come up with, kids? About what was your winning song, and there's so much out there with these little my trick is I'm often looking for interactive websites and trying to use that term and search and find, interactive websites that will do those things.
I have a story to share kind of similar to that, Sean. I have a student who has gotten really interested in music. He's a teenager. Like most teenagers are very interested in music. Also an AAC user, has some verbal speech, but he's able to type. And so he'll oftentimes say just like in the middle of whatever we're doing, he'll blurt out like a song title. So like he likes the song Shallow by Lady Gaga. So he'll just be like, Shallow. And everyone but me is really confused, because he hasn't given us any context. He hasn't attached like listen to. And so anyway, I've been teaching him how to include the artist name. And so we've created this whole like Canva. I use Canva a lot in my therapy, because it's super easy to pull in images of Lady Gaga and like all types of things. Right. So now we're like making sure that like if he knows the title of the song, he also knows the artist, because that's like a context clue that makes people know, oh, he wants to listen to a song right now. So anyway, we've been working on this. He likes Pitbull. He likes Lady Gaga. He likes James Blunt. Like it's a very eclectic mix of music. But for the first time yesterday, he finally spontaneously said Shallow by Lady Gaga. And I was like, yes. So anyway, this is just an example of how like following a child's lead, their interests, and really figuring out the breakdowns in communication. So he was very motivated to say Shallow and Fireball and all of his favorite songs. But if we don't give the context as to an artist or use, listen to, we don't know what he's saying. Most people don't know what he's saying. So anyway, that reminded me of what you were just talking about as far as just like music and how we can incorporate those types of things into our therapy.
Yeah, music is so rich for motivation, right? But my question to you, Rachel, is now, can you sing the Lady Gaga high part?
Definitely not.
Just anyone can. You just go, oh. All right, you got practice.
I can probably sing it as well as you can sing Cher, Sean.
Ooh, too soon. Just kidding. I have a student. I've learned a lot about Pokemon in the past year. I have a student who we do almost all Pokemon-based therapy, because we're doing some vocabulary and sentence, and grammatical development. And he comes into every session with a Pokemon card, and it's like amazing, like how complicated the language is, in Pokemon, and the types kind of lead you to categorization and setting, and there's just so much you can do with that. And we've been working through one comic, Pokemon Adventures Volume 1 for weeks on end because the story is quite rich. It has episodes within it, and we've just been doing story grammar marker and, picking out, because oftentimes I'm kind of co-creating the meaning of this comic with him, because some character has just flown in with a Pokemon that I don't recognize. And I'm like, what the hell is happening? And he's like, oh, that's, I can't even remember. But
Charizard or something. Yeah.
Yes, Charizard was involved. That's great. And that's been one way I've used my public library card with Overdrive. And, I just remember to keep taking out that same comic every week, and it resides in the Kindle application on my Mac. So that we're always working through that and finding new vocabulary to do. For him, even there's been some, the theme of the Pokemon's endurance, and he needs to develop endurance, for different activities. And so that's one of the things we're kind of incorporating with like zones of regulation and, how can you use tools to evolve yourself, from being cranky when you arrive to, because once he's in an activity, he's totally fine. It is an evolution process. But that whole way that Pokemon evolve is helpful to him.
Well, so Sean, I think that's such a great activity. You've given us so much to think about here. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and maybe you can come back sometime and we'll chat about some other things in the future. What else you got as we wrap up? What's next for you? Any big adventures coming up?
For me, big adventures. Do you mean like in life or in work?
Work, either way.
I think I think just adjusting to where we are at right now is my big adventure, like kind of the veil of things, what we've endured in the past couple of years, just sort of lifting and becoming and moving into, more normal is I think where all educators are at, so that's kind of my big adventure is just finding the flow again, of what we're doing. And that's being mostly successful at that.
Yeah.
It's a day-to-day process. And I've gotten much more in the flow of writing every week and continuing to share resources. So I look forward to keeping up that flow for sure.
Well, fantastic. Check them out over at speechtechie.com, right? That's still the blog, right?
That's still the blog.
Love it. I've subscribed and I get the emails. I've been getting them for 11 years now.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you for having me here. It was awesome chatting with you both.
All right. For Talking with Tech, I'm Chris. This is Sean, and we got Rachel, and we'll talk to you next time.